Bridget Bowles will share the best practices for managing a publication redesign. She'll discuss timelines for planning and implementing changes. She'll give you a good overview of all of the different facets to consider. Bridget will also share several case studies to help illustrate the process and spark ideas for your own publication redesign. Bridget has worked at Allen Press for 3 years. She started as a Journal and Society marketer in our publishing department, and she currently manages our corporate communications and marketing. Bridget graduated from the University of Kansas with degrees in strategic communications and English, and she enjoys KU sports, gardening, reading, and traveling. I'm going to turn the presentation over to Bridget to get us started now.
Thanks, Melanie. I'm looking forward to discussing how to manage a publication redesign with all of you. And just as a brief overview of what we're going to be looking at, we're going to briefly touch on what a redesign is and the various pieces of that, and why we hear a lot of publishers decide that they want to redesign their publication. We're also going to look at various timelines for undertaking specific redesigns, what tasks you should do at what times and when you should start. We'll also go more in depth with the various tasks of a redesign and tips for things like that, and then also just some lessons that we've learned while working with various publishers as they worked on redesigns. And just throughout this presentation, we're going to have various case studies so you can see examples of successful redesigns and just get a few ideas like Melanie mentioned. So looking at this image, we can see that there's a lot of different types of redesign, and the gray circle kind of represents a full redesign, and all of the other circles in there are elements that go into a full redesign. So sometimes we hear that people just want to redesign their cover, give kind of a facelift to their publication. So that can be one big piece that you choose to take on just as a project in and of itself or as part of a larger full redesign. Similarly, sometimes people just redesign their logo, or they're looking to do the page layout of the internal pages. These are all pieces that can be taken individually. Also, I have sort of inside of the circle and sort of outside content redesign. So that's the mix of articles that you're choosing to include in your publication. So this can be sometimes done as part of a full redesign, but sometimes clients just decide to do this independently of anything else and just relook at that and not change anything with the appearance of the journal. So this can be part of it, but it can be undertaken outside of an appearance redesign as well. So some of the reasons that we hear publishers wanting to do a redesign, if they're maybe prompted by it, they have a new article type and they're trying to figure out how to fit that in. We have a lot of publications that are including online-only journals, or online-only articles. And as they're trying to figure out how they want to work in an abstract for that, or a directive to go to the website and see that, they're trying to figure out how to fit that into their print publication, and therefore, they have to reshape how everything looks. So they decide to undertake a redesign for that. Also, people are looking to save money on their publication. They can cut production costs or printing costs, and you can definitely redesign with that in mind and look to save some money. Some societies are just looking to rebrand if they haven't done that in a while, and they're looking to address their publication as part of that. Also, we see a lot of people using a milestone anniversary as kind of a jumping point for doing a redesign. Another element is if you're looking to speed up your workflow, or if you're just tired of the way your publication looks, you can choose to redesign and just kind of freshen everything up. So a lot of the perks that can come from a redesign, if you're really focusing on it and you're changing to try and save money, some changes can save up to 20% on your production, which is astronomical when you're looking at a lot of publications or a lot of issues throughout a year. That can really help your bottom line. Also, you can have remove some pain points for maybe your authors or your editors, elements that, or even your readers, that they find difficult to read or difficult to write to. You can look to decrease those. Also, you can save money on typesetting, or just speed up your workflow. The more focused. You can have everything. You can make it just flow quicker throughout the process. You can also remove outdated elements, things that just look old, and just give your publication a fresh face. And really, one fantastic thing that can come is you can just really generate some buzz and excitement about your publication again, and get your members talking, and not just have it be something that they receive in the mail or get online all the time, but it's something new and fresh and really re-emphasizes the value of your publication. So we're going to look at a timeline for when you want to start these various types of redesigns. And I just want to be clear that this is working under the assumption that you're going to launch a redesign with the first issue of a new volume. This is definitely a best practice that we recommend. Not everybody has to follow it, but it's a best practice. So this timeline has everything going up to that new volume with the first of the year. So if you're looking to do a full redesign, we recommend starting about a year ahead of time. I came up with this timeline after talking to managing editing and design, a lot of people within Allen Press, and a big thing that comes out of it is the more time you give yourself for a redesign, the better result you're going to end up with, because you can put good thought into it and not have to rush through anything. Just make sure everything's ready to go for that first of the year. This also assumes that you want to have everything done about 2 to 3 months ahead of time when your articles are due for that first issue of the new volume. That's really when it's going into production. So your members won't see it until the first of the year or whenever your first issue comes out, but everything needs to be in place to get that set. We also look at kind of your content redesign that we discussed. You want to start that maybe 9 months ahead of time. Also, if you're looking to do a cover redesign or your internal layout of your pages. If you're doing a logo redesign, that can be done much later, because that's one easy element to just pop into your production files that you already have going. So that can be started much later in the year. So a content redesign, like I said, you want to start preparing about 9 to 10 months ahead of time, deciding, doing that research about what you want to do, work on, we call it design here for consistency of the term, but really deciding, designing what articles you want, what you want the mix to be, how many research articles, how many review articles, things like that. And you really want to finalize that about 6 months ahead of time so that you can communicate that to your authors and they can start submitting papers that reflect that ahead of time, in time for your launch at the first of the year. Things that you might not think about that you'll also want to update. Anything within your style guide that reflects the different article types. If you have a new article type, you'll want to address that in your style guide, and also your author guidelines, so that they have all the information, like I said, so that they can submit their papers. You also want to consider, what are you going to do with the backlog of already typeset articles? So we see a lot of publications that now have issues in progress, or they're putting up preprints of already typeset articles. So these are already accepted, they're already typeset. They're essentially in their final form, they're just not in an issue yet. So if you have a large amount of, say, research articles and you're deciding to, cut back on that, that may end up with some of your authors not getting published until later. It'll take longer to go through those articles. So you really want to look at your backlog and see how these changes are going to affect that and how you're going to be able to use the articles moving forward. Also, just something to consider is that various content types, various articles are assessed differently going into your impact factor. So if your impact factor is something you really take seriously, you want to think through the long-term implications of changing what types of articles you accept and publish. For a layout redesign and a cover redesign, you want to start around 9-10 months ahead of time, and you'll see you're not finalizing everything and approving it until later, more when the articles are in typeset as opposed to that timeline that we had previously. Same amount of time. I think it's very important to give yourself a month or so or more to really prepare, quoting with your various vendors, and then a good chunk of time for design. I was very generous with that in here. So you can have that back and forth and really come up with a product that you're really happy with. And then final touches and marketing your changes. Like I said, you can get your members really excited about your publication, but in order to do that, you need to tell them that it's coming. They might not notice if something just changes and nobody's told them about it. So that communication is very important. Some things to consider for a layout redesign. Like I said, again, you want to be updating your style guide. You'll also want to consider updating your table of contents as part of your layout. Also, any other front matter that you have, lists of your editorial boards or things like that, and also again, author guidelines if perhaps you are now accepting, a practitioner summary, so you have your abstract and then also kind of an on-the-ground type summary. That's information you'll want to communicate that you're expecting to receive. Similarly, like we mentioned before, you want to think about that backlog of typeset articles. For this, it really comes down to you've already paid for the articles to be typeset if you already have them in your backlog. And if you are deciding to do a new layout, you'll either need to pay to have them retypeset, which really could negate some of the cost savings that come with a lot of redesigns, or you want to think about using them all up before you roll out your new redesign. Also, just thinking through, is this new layout going to affect your print costs, or how long it takes things to go through typesetting, and therefore the time and cost associated with that? And how is it going to look in print and online, or potentially on mobile, if that's something that you have? Members and readers are accessing articles in a variety of different ways, so you want to figure out what's going to work the best for your membership and your readership. For a cover redesign, you might want to consider your logo. Is that something you're keeping, or is that something you want to update? You also want to incorporate that design into your website banner, also your mobile splash page, any banners that you have on your mobile optimized site, any branded promotional items. I know we give away a lot of various things for some of our publishing titles that have a journal cover on there, and if you have a new cover, that's not what the journal looks like anymore. It's not a very effective marketing tool. So you'll want to think about using up those branded promotional items or ordering some more. You also want to remember to update the image of your cover on your society page, and also any branding that you have on your peer review site that aligns with the cover, you're going to want to remember to update as well. Things to think about, brand recognition. Sometimes this is not as important nowadays because a lot of authors are reaching a journal at the article level. So we're seeing the cover less and less, but it's still important, especially if you have a big print circulation. People are getting this in the mail. You want them to recognize what it is and have it be something that they trust so that they don't throw it away thinking that it's junk mail and something different. So consider your brand recognition and keeping things familiar for your members. Also, printing costs. If you're going from a black and white cover to a 4-color, that's going to quadruple your costs. So you want to consider the bottom line and financial repercussions of your redesign. Also, how easy will it be for you to maintain your cover? So sometimes we see people wanting a really strong image or graphic on their cover. And if that's something that you're going to change with every issue, you want to make sure you're going to be able to get those new photos or files for your cover easily, and that's not going to add a lot of time and hassle and cost for you to have those images every time. And this is an interesting one. The way that you show your title on the cover of your journal affects how people, what they think the title of your journal is. So if you have a long title, and that's the official title of your publication, and you decide with your redesign that it's really hard to fit it in there, and you decide to use your acronym instead, some of your authors and readers may think that that's the new title of the journal, and that's the way that they will start citing the journal, and then, down the way that could affect your citation rate, because if people aren't citing your publication correctly, then you're not getting the credit for the citation. So be clear with making sure your title is what it is and that people can see that and they understand it correctly. Also, logo redesign, since we're starting late, we're very squished at the end of the timeline. It's good to start preparing around 3 months ahead of time, and then really, things can flow pretty quickly through this process. So everything's one after another on this list. If that's something that you're interested in doing, I would definitely give yourself an adequate amount of time, and you probably need more time in the design than everything else, but that won't take as long as anything else. So you want to look to update all the places that your logo is, on your cover, on your journal website, society website, mobile site, any branded items, and your peer review system, as well as anywhere else that your logo is. You want to remember to update it in all of those places so that you're consistent, and ideally try and update all of them at the same time, so you kind of have a launch and you don't have any inconsistent, conflicting logos at the same time. And like with the journal cover, you just want to think about your brand recognition and making sure that people know who you are and that they recognize it. So this is one example of a logo redesign. The Council of Science Editors undertook this as a larger, project of their strategic goals as a society. Part of it was updating their logo. So you can see they kept a lot of the same elements, the circular shape with this beaker inside, and actually a fountain pen inside of there with the dark blue area. And you can see they kept their main color, but then they also added this brighter blue element as well. I've heard people say that they need to stick with the exact color palette that they've had before to try and stay consistent with their branding. And I recommend that you don't have to stick with that. It's very good to keep elements that honor your former logo, but you don't necessarily have to be legalistic about it, because that really kind of restricts your potential in your redesign. So don't be afraid to branch out a little bit more. And this is just a timeline for a full journal redesign. So this is the whole year project with a generous amount of time giving to preparation and a good amount for your design as well. The more you can prepare for your redesign, the more smoothly everything's going to flow through the rest of your project. So I highly recommend putting lots of time and effort into that. So there's a lot of elements to update if you do a full redesign. You're thinking about your print journal, your website, your branded materials, mobile, society, peer review system, all of those things, and a lot of aspects within it. So this is a really large project. And so you really want to give yourself plenty of time so that you can do all of these things and make sure everything's checked off your to-do list. And you want to consider all of those questions and concerns that we've addressed earlier. What's the bigger picture that's going to result of your redesign? And we've already talked about all of these elements, so I don't want to go through them again, but just really think through everything that could happen if you decide to do a full redesign for your publication. It's definitely worthwhile. It's definitely a good thing to do, so it's worth all of these considerations and tasks, but you want to give it plenty of time. So now we're going to look at the various elements of the redesign process, some examples, and what you should be doing in each one of these steps. So in your preparation stage, you really want to think about your organization. how it works, how it functions, and undertake your redesign process within that. So if you have an editorial board that's very involved in the publication and you know that you're going to need their approval for any changes, you may want to get them on board very early with this process so that they can be a part of it and be supportive of it and voice any concerns up front. If you just have one person who's really doing the majority of the work on the publication, you can go ahead and let that one person handle the whole project by themselves and maybe pull in, other coworkers for occasional help, but that one person can drive it. You know what works best with your organization, and you want this project to fit into that structure. You also want to fit in your redesign with any larger strategic goals you have for your society or your publication so that it's cohesive, it's supportive of your goals, and nothing distracts from anything else that you have going on strategically for your organization. You also want to think about ahead of time, what degree of change are you comfortable with? So if you just want something very slight and a little bit of change, you might want to think on the scale of 1 to 10, more of a, 1, 2, or 3. You just want some slight tweaks. But if you're really looking to, do a massive overhaul of everything and you're redesigning your whole society and your website and everything, you might be looking at a larger, more substantial change, and you might want to think more about, 7, 8, or 9. And like I said, any others that you're working with on this project, you want to make sure you're all on the same page so that, one person's not looking for a 1 or 2 minimal change and somebody else is thinking you're going to have a huge change. You all want to be on the same page and consistent. You also want to think about using any analytics and any information that you have. So what do your readers think about your publications? Survey them and find out what they like and what they don't like, what they might find appealing. Also, look at your online statistics and your readership. Find out, is it more important for you to spend your time updating for a website and how those articles are viewed online, because that's where 80% of your people and members are looking at your content, or are you still very print-centric and most of your readers read the print issues, then you may want to spend more time on the print side of everything. Likewise, consider mobile. You can find that information through your online analytics, how many people are accessing your site through mobile, and consider if that's a priority for your redesign. You just want to have as much information as possible so that you can be undertaking your redesign in an informed way and a focused way so that you're making decisions not just on what you think looks good, but what is going to make your publication the most successful. So you want to think about gathering examples. This is hugely important and hugely helpful to any designer that you're going to end up working with. These are a few sources. We share our slides after this webinar is done, so you'll be able to go check out these websites. And a lot of these are just, case studies of redesigns, or just, a lot of information about designing magazines and publications in the first place. I personally really like tangible things, so go to your library or look at, some other publications and see what elements of design it is that you like. If you like a particular layout, if you really like the way the masthead of the cover really pops out at you, pull those those examples and compile them all. Just anything in life. It doesn't even have to be another print publication. If you find color scheme that you really like or another website, compile all that information so that you're really able to have an idea of the feel that you want, the colors, the look, the impression that you're trying to convey, so that you can give that information to designers and they can create a redesign that really fits in with your expectations. as you're preparing to undertake a publication redesign, some elements that we see publishers changing a lot, trim size. If your journal isn't already an 8.5 by 11, moving to that size can save you some money because that's really an optimal size for some printing. Also, having smaller margins on your articles can let you get, increased words per pages so that you can fit more in your publication and save some money that way, or potentially cut back on your pages and save money that way. This is one example of the Journal of Oral Implantology. They had this layout, which visually is very appealing, but you can see there's very wide margins there. So they decided to redesign so that they kept that 2-column layout, but got rid of the large column there, and this was able, helped them to get a lot more articles in per issue. This is a very successful journal. They get a lot of submissions. They have a lot of content that they're trying to get out to their members. They really want to get as many articles into each print publication and each issue as possible. We also see people changing fonts, and all of these elements, trim size, smaller margins, playing with your fonts. Why we see so many people changing that is that the largest driver of cost for your print production is the number of pages. So the more pages you have, the more paper you're paying for, and ink, and all of those, costs. So being able to redesign so you can have less pages can really save you a lot of money. Changing the font. So these are two examples of both of these fonts are in 16-point and 1.5 spacing, and you can see that the Georgia is substantially longer than the Arial narrow. So just think about this playing out over, a 6-page article, how much space you could be saving yourself by having a different font. So you want to choose your fonts very carefully so that they fit in with your spacing and what your goals are for how many pages that you're using. Also, fonts convey a lot of personality. So, the large division we have is serif and sans serif. So on the left we have sans serif, and on the right we have serif. And there's just a lot of deviation within these two. So traditionally, sans serif is, and research shows that it's easier to read online. So if you have an online dominant publication, you might want to consider using one of these fonts. But as far as reading in print, research shows readers don't have much difference or preference between serif or sans serif. So if you're designing more for print-centric, you can think more about what personality am I trying to convey, what do you want readers to take away from looking at their publication, and you want to make sure things are really readable and easy to quickly read and scan. We're giving a lot of content in these publications, so we want it to be able to be easily processed. This is another example, actually, of the Journal of Oral Implantology. So on the left, we have the redesign that we discussed earlier with the smaller margin, and they actually decided they wanted to try and get even more content per issue, so they decreased their font point just by 1 point, and they were able to get 2 more articles per issue on average out of that one slight change. And yes, looking at them this small, it's difficult to read, but the product they have is still very attractive and very easy to read. So this was a really successful redesign for them. Other elements that we see people changing, tail-in articles. That's having the header start right underneath the references or the end of another article. When print used to be more important and trying to save pages that way, we used to see this more often because having, not wasting the bottom amount of that page for each one could really, save a page or two in the end. But now, since almost all publications are in print and online, having a tail-in article means that you need to retypeset everything afterward so that you can have separate PDFs for each article. So removing tail-in articles from the very beginning and printing that way allows you to have it online that way and save yourself some typesetting costs. Also, any elements that require manual work. So talk to your vendors and your typesetters. Find out what they're spending time on. Shaded figures is one here that requires a lot of manual work, and so we see people moving away from that so that they can speed up their typesetting and also save some costs there. Similarly, if you have a custom reference style, that requires more manual work to process, whereas if you're staying really in line with MLA style or APA, then that's something that can be more digitized and go through quicker and more affordably. Just a small thing, we see people shifting where they put their author's contact information. You don't want to waste all that important, top of the page space, so maybe have the author's names and then all their contact information down at the bottom. And something we see more design-wise, a lot of people are using grayscale so that it still prints affordably to design some really interesting elements. We have some examples of that to show you. So Epilepsy Currents, this was their previous layout, and very attractive. They already have the grayscale behind their abstracts, but when they redesigned it, they carried this interesting header that has kind of that wave heartbeat up there at the top. They carried that over onto every page, and personally I think this is a really attractive design. It adds kind of an image to every page, but since it's a standing element, they don't have to have a figure processing charge. That's all already in there. They also kept their shaded box, but they just kind of redefined it a little bit, and they added this little tab at the top, Epilepsy Currents up there, and just makes for a very attractive, very modern-looking publication, and just kind of gave a slight facelift with not a lot of effort into their changes. Likewise, IEEE, the A&E Systems magazine, this was their article appearance before they did a redesign. And afterwards, they used actually a black bar, so it could still be printed in black and white, except for this cover color image on the right. And they carried this into their section headers. So, like I said, very modern. It definitely gives everything a very clean, shapely look, and it can be printed in a very straightforward way as well. And this is just the subsequent pages of that same article. You can see they don't keep the black bar across all of the pages. Unlike Epilepsy Currents, they just have that on the first 2 pages of each article, so they fold out together like that. But then throughout, they just have the rest of other typeset articles. So there's a lot of different options that you can do for your page layout and using design elements within them. Also, we see a lot of publishers adding DOIs, ORCID IDs, Altmetrics Badges. These are just more of things that we see changing in the industry and how we're incorporating them into our publications. So most publications already have DOIs, but if you don't, definitely print that there. It helps with your citations. ORCID IDs, just consistency in the way that authors can be more easily identified and not confused with anybody else. And Altmetric Badges, just showing alternatives to other citations. So this is an example of how the Altmetric Badge is represented on Chelonian Research Foundation, their publication, Chelonian Conservation and Biology. They put their Altmetric Badge just right at the article level, and this is easily done on a lot of websites. And it just is showing how this article is going out into the world and how it's being used in news sources and talked about on social media. You can't incorporate this in print since it's constantly changing, but it's a really good option for redesigning things on your website. So really, what it comes down to, those elements at first that we're looking at are really about the money, removing tail-end articles and anything that requires manual work. That's more about time, which also saves you money, but it's really about saving you time and speeding up the process. The reference style and the location of the article, contact information is really about the image that you're looking at for your publication, and then just adding the DOIs and ORCID IDs. That's the nuts and bolts of what's kind of going on in industry today, and just keeping your publication up to date with that. So just as a summary, these are some of the things that we talked about for preparing for undertaking a publication redesign. Really spend a lot of time in this process. The more time you spend here, the better product you're going to get, and the more time you'll save later in the process. Quoting, you want to remember to talk to all of your service providers, you know, whoever you're using for your design, or if you're handling that in-house, you want to be very clear and share all your preparation materials with them, but you also want to talk to your online hosting provider and make sure that all of your redesign will be able to be carried over into that. Likewise, typesetting, you don't want to make any major changes that then add a lot of manual work and time and effort into your typesetting and therefore cost you a lot more in the end. Definitely talk to your printer, find out what these new designs, how that will change the way your piece is printed, and also anybody who does your XML tagging, make sure this will all go smoothly within that process. And also copy editing, just keep everybody on the same page, keep them informed, and get any quotes that you need from these various providers. Instead, provide them the information from the preparation stage, communicate your expectations if you want to give them a lot of freedom or if you're really looking for them to execute on a very specific idea that you have. You want to make sure you're just giving them all that information. And then you'll get your samples back from them and your quotes for how much this is going to cost or if there will be a cost, and you know, some rough samples of what this will look like. And from there, you'll move into the design stage if it's, you know, online or with a design firm, you know, whatever service provider you need to work on this design stage for your specific redesign. You want to talk to them and, like I said, give them the formats of your publication and kind of the split between print and online and mobile. Explain your priorities. Are you really redesigning so that you can save time and everything can go faster, or are you redesigning just to give a whole new look and time and money isn't any, you know, consideration at all? That's kind of the designer's dream, I would think, but it doesn't happen that often. But let them know what your priorities are with your redesign so that they can shape the files that they give you to that priority. And they'll, you know, show them any examples that you have. Talking to our design team, they really appreciate that. If you can give them examples of, I really want it to look something like this, or I really like this element, the more you can give them, the better that can really work. Really what we see is a lot of times, at least in-house here at Allen Press, what we'll do is we'll take your concepts, we'll come up with a few examples or designs and give those to you. And what we usually see is people, you know, are strongly attracted to one, but maybe they want to pull one element out of another design and maybe one other idea that they had forgotten to communicate. And really that's what we use to build a new design very quickly. This works a lot better than coming up with one design and then sending it to the customer, having them, you know, talk about what they like, don't like, sending it back. That ends with a lot of back and forth, but this way is very efficient, and so that's what we use here in-house. So another case study, this is AHIA's New Perspective, and you can see they already had a very attractive publication. You know, some really great text boxes, a great color bar at the top of the article level, you know, really good cover with interesting use of their logo and then the title. It was already a really strong publication, and so what they decided to do was just kind of freshen things up a little bit. So this was their end result. They have this color bar and then, you know, an interesting graphic underneath, and every article type that they have has a different color, so it's really interesting. And then their table of contents is very cohesive with that. And you can see they kept similar, you know, pull-out quotes, but they don't have the shaded box behind them, but they're still visually interesting in a different text color. Just kind of gave everything a little facelift, and this is a very attractive redesign. This was a full redesign, more of a magazine style type publication. And this took around 2 months of the design phase, which is what we worked on with them. And I don't have information of how much, preparation time they spent on that, but you can see the design phase can take a good chunk of time. So you want to make sure you're giving yourself enough time for that. Takeaways from this publication, I think really great use of color. It's very attractive, but it's not overwhelming. It's very graphically interesting, but they don't waste a lot of space with large graphics. So it's very efficient as well. And they retained a lot of the elements that they already had, so it was very recognizable and usable, but they refined them so they were a little bit more modern. Definitely a best practice that we recommend is work with your designer to design one element. So maybe your cover or your table of contents or an article. Get that finalized and locked down, approve it, get everybody within your organization on board, and then let the designer design the rest of the publication to flow with that. Because once they have those elements and those headers and section headers and pull quotes and everything, they can really design the rest of the publication very quickly to be cohesive with that, and it's really easy. Like I said, back and forth at this design stage can get costly really quickly. So the more efficient you can be and effective with your communications and with your approvals, the more that will really benefit you in the long run. Another example, so we looked at the internal article pages of this publication earlier, is IEEE, the A&E Systems magazine. So this was their cover, their table of contents, and then a letter from the editor. And what they did was they redesigned an article first and then used that to build the rest of the publication. And so this is what the table of contents and the rest of the publication ended up looking like. You can see that these bars with white text in front of it, that element's carried up onto the cover as well with their IEEE logo. Makes for a very cohesive, attractive looking publication and a really great redesign. This was also a full redesign, but it only took about a month of back and forth. And so, you can have a big variety depending on getting approvals from everybody and working with your design team. That can really vary how long it's going to take. Like we talked about, really successful to design one element, approve it, and then move on. Another thing to consider, if you're a math or graph-heavy publication, make sure you choose to work on your article layout with an article that includes math, because you want to make sure you have a plan for that in the first place, because that's a very important element, and you want to make sure you already have a plan for it, and you don't design an article with no math, and then you get to an article with math, and you're scrambling to figure out what to do. You want to plan for all of the elements that you see the most in your publication in your design phase. Some tips for the design: make sure it's going to look good on print and online. Know the limitations of your workflow. What type of typesetting are you using? What's your printer? Any limitations they have? Any limitations of your online website? Find out from all your vendors if your designs are going to work. And like I said, examples are extremely appreciated by designers. Once everything's designed, get your feedback from a small group of members, or your editorial board could be your small group of members. Since your readers are the ones who are going to be using your publication, you want to make sure this is something that they're going to like and they're going to enjoy and they're going to know how to use. Because otherwise, if they don't like it, you're going to be redesigning very quickly. So you want to make sure that this is something that works for them up front before you approve it and implement it all. And also just remember, all the elements that we talked about up in our timeline stage. If you change one thing, you're going to have to change another. So go through that checklist that we had originally talked about and make sure you're changing everything that needs to be changed based on what it is that you're redesigning. Finally, marketing your changes. You want to make sure that you get everybody excited. You spent a lot of time and effort and probably money on this redesign, so make sure your members know that this is great and you've done something fantastic. Send them an email, send them a letter, send them multiple emails and letters. Consider taking out an ad in your journal or putting on your journal website announcing that a change is coming. Build that buzz. You can also put a tip on cover, so maybe on your first issue of the next volume, have a tip on, a flyer that sits on top and it's kind of glued on. So you could have your old cover on there, and then they could tear it off and see the new cover, kind of have an unveiling. We've had publications do that before, and it works really well. Also consider launching your redesign at the annual meeting. This is something you want to consider. You want to adjust your whole timeline accordingly to make sure you'll be able to have the files there for whenever your annual meeting is, but that could be something to really announce it when everybody's together and get them talking about it and get them excited. Write an editorial in that first issue explaining it, why you did it, who worked on it, giving praise for those people who put in a lot of time and effort. Or maybe have a contest to get the members involved in the redesign in the first place. So one example of that is Castania. They redesigned their cover a few years ago, and you can see it was a really beautiful photographs that they have now. Their content really lends themselves very well to good graphic covers. So they actually had a photo contest, and all the winners get to be on the publications for the next year. So announcing that photo contest informed members that changes were coming, and it also got them on board with it. They got to have the opportunity to have their photo on the cover, which everybody loves seeing their work in print. So, it was something they got excited about. So they have a sustainable source for all of their cover images, and they also got some excitement and buzz. If you're considering going to a color cover and you haven't had one before, remember that it can increase costs. And one way you can consider supplementing that is by selling an ad on the back cover that can also be printed in color, obviously, and use that to kind of make up the costs if you already are selling advertising. It's also really important to market your changes internally. Like I said, you've worked really hard on it, and you want to make sure everybody knows that it's coming, knows why it was there. Your internal staff are the people that are answering questions from members, that are working with the authors. They're really the face of your organization. So you want to make sure that they're on board about the changes and knowledgeable about them so that they can help everything flow smoothly. So consider having a launch party. If you have an office, unveil your logo, unveil your new cover, give out cookies, just something that you have an opportunity to tell people about your changes and communicate that and get them excited. Also, just a real simple thing, give everybody a copy of the new journal so that they can, see it and look through it and flip the pages, or access to the website or mobile site. Like I said, they're going to be answering the questions, so they need to know how to use it. Real quickly, a couple things to avoid why we see some redesigns not working. If you can't get approval, if people didn't know this was coming in the first place and they really liked the old designs, and eventually you get this out there and your bylaws require that you get approval from a group of people and they didn't know about it, they might not approve it in the end, and then you've wasted a lot of time. Or if members dislike it, you didn't do your research to find out what they would like or how they use the publication. If this isn't working for them, that's not going to stick. Disagreements in the organization, not having a clear vision when you start. If you end up with a lot of back and forth, you could end up exceeding the budget that you've allocated for this project, and then you can't take it any farther, which would not be good, and just kind of similar to politics that can sometimes be present in associations and organizations can end up working against a redesign. So, like I keep saying, spend that time in the preparation stage to really try and avoid these potential pitfalls down the road. So just to kind of summarize everything, start early, spend your time in your preparation stage, have your reasons. A redesign doesn't have to be a one-time thing. Don't be afraid to tweak things later. We had the JOI example where they kept doing little changes every few years, and that's totally fine. But really try and get as close as possible that first time. And remember, if you're going to change your title, or if you're going to have your new cover make it look like you accidentally changed your title, that can have a lot of larger implications for your impact factor or aggregations. So just be very cautious about that. And if that's something you're going to do, give yourself plenty of extra time. So that sums up our webinar. I'm going to turn this back over to Melanie.
Great, thank you, Bridget. We do have a couple of questions. The first one is when you were talking about elements that we see publishers changing here at Allen Press, you referenced shaded figures. Could you explain what shaded figures are?
So that's something I heard from some of our account managers and managing editors. So I'll clarify more with them later and probably send that information out in our follow-up email and everything. But to the best of my understanding, shaded figures are when an author sends in a table and then maybe they need to have every other column, if we're printed in grayscale, you know, a color figure isn't going to work, or chart, so you may need to have it shaded in, you know, lines, dots, you know, checkers, whatever it is, and that requires manual work, so that we have to do work on the back end for the figure. But if you have requirements for your figures going into it so that your authors submit them in a way so that they're already, you know, essentially production ready, then you don't have to put that extra work in on the back end.
Great, that's great, thank you. And obviously if you are requesting authors to put those figures in, submit those figures in a certain way and they don't do it and then we have to fix it, so the more complicated you make it for your authors to start, the more chance we're going to have to do some manual work, which costs the publisher money in the end. I have another question. So if you change the reference style, are there any implications for partner organizations like PubMed?
That's not something that I have information about PubMed specifically, so I wouldn't want to give you incorrect information. Can definitely look into that more and find out and share that information after the webinar.
And I think as long as you had the elements that, you know, that they require, the DOIs and the links and so forth, it shouldn't. There are lots of different styles going into PubMed now. There's no uniform reference style that they require that I'm aware of. So another question, and if you have questions, now's the time to chat them in using the WebEx chat function. So we have a question about whether or not, maybe some tips or pointers you might have when designing a new publication rather than redesigning an existing one.
Oh, I would definitely, you know, it's a very similar process. You're not working on refining something, but you'd want to think about a lot of those same questions that we talked about in the preparation stage. You know, how do you intend for people to use this publication, this new one that you've created? You know, what do you want it to look like? What other publications are out there that you might want to not copy, but get inspiration from for your design? So a lot of those preparation costs still, you know, are still there. Sorry, the preparation, you know, the importance of preparing is still out there for a new publication. I haven't undertaken any new journals, so I would expect that it would take a longer amount of time. So I might want to think about that, and you're, you know, not changing any processes, you're building them up from the ground up. Also, if cost is really important, think about maybe involving your service providers for getting those quotes for how much the new publication is going to run you with what you're looking at, because there can be a massive range depending on what type of a publication you're deciding to start.
Great, thank you, Bridget. I have a couple of terminology questions. Could you tell us what a digital object identifier and an ORCID is?
So a DOI is a digital object identifier, and it is a unique series of numbers. They're typically really long, and that ensures that, you know, even if a website changes, that the DOI resolves to that same article. It really keeps articles from getting lost within the system, and also helps citations to that article make sure they're attributed back to your publication correctly, and you're getting credit for that if you have an impact factor score. And an ORCID ID is a unique author ID. It's, you know, really been coming to prominence in the past couple of years, and it avoids, you know, John Smith, the 5,000 John Smiths that there are, it makes John Smith also have a number so that you can look him up and he doesn't get confused with somebody else. It really just helps clarify things that people can contact the right authors if they have questions, and credit can be given to the correct authors for each of their articles.
Great, thank you very much, Bridget. Well, that is all of the questions that we have today. So I want to thank Bridget and everyone who attended the webinar today. I hope you enjoyed the presentation and that you learned some things to help you make good choices for your own publication.